Are you looking to host a static JavaScript application? If you are, this walkthrough might be something of interest to you. I'm going to show you the steps to deploy your application so that it is highly available, highly resilient, and has most of the capabilities that you expect from a large commercial application. Probably the best part of the solution, I think, is that we can do this on a student's budget, yet serve millions and millions and millions of users. So if you've built your application using something like React, Angular, Next.js, Vue, or any other kind of modern JavaScript application framework, stick around to see how you can host that site. But before we get cracking, let's just have a look at some of the goals, prerequisites, and advantages of this solution before we get into the tutorial. Okay, looking at our goals, obviously we're going to host a modern web application, so that's our primary goal. But that also means that we more than likely need to have the capability to deal with client-side routing and also deep linking. And what I mean by deep linking is a lot of routing relies on the application manipulating the URL bar, but there might not necessarily be a file on the web server for that URL. And so what our application needs to be able to do, if some files are missing, we need to serve the root of our application so that the routing logic can take hold and serve the customer correctly. Of course, to maintain our brand, we also want to be able to use our own domain name. And finally, we want to provide our users with a nice, secure experience. So we need to have an Ssl certificate and also show you how we can get an Ssl certificate that we can use for free with the Amazon Web Services. As far as our benefits are concerned, we're going to be using full serverless technologies, and that just means we don't have to worry about maintaining servers. We don't have to worry about scaling up the service, scaling down the service, patching the service, or securing the service. That's all taken care of by Amazon and all the Amazon engineering. So that's going to give us a really nice, stable solution. And most importantly, we don't have to pay for any servers. We're also going to be using Amazon's Cloudfront, which is a content delivery network. And what that does for our users, it means that our content is going to be physically as close as possible to where the user's location is. So just as an example, let's say we've got one of our users in Germany right now, and they request our website. What's going to happen is the very first time Amazon is going to push our content to a data center, let's say in Frankfurt, it's going to be cached there. And from then on forward, any user in Germany is going to get the content from the Frankfurt data center. And because they're physically closer, there's going to be less latency, or more likely to have less latency. And so, of course, the other advantage is that we're going to do this in a really affordable, cost-effective way. The prerequisites, I'm going to assume that you have your own domain name, that you have the capability to change the domain name records, or the DNS records, and of course, you're going to need an Amazon account, and you can sign up for that for free, I believe. And so now you should have a good overview of what we're about to do. And with that, I'd say let's get into the fun stuff and get started with the tutorial. Let's go. I've logged into my AWS account. And the first thing we want to do is set up an Ssl certificate for our domain. So we're going to do that with a service called Certificate Manager. And if you go there, now you want to be sure that you choose the North Virginia region. That's quite important because Cloudfront only operates in the main North Virginia region. And if you're in a different region like Sydney, for example, then the Ssl certificate you generate is not going to work with Cloudfront. So just make sure you're up here, you select US East 1. Once you've done that, click on Request Certificate. Then we want to request the public certificate. And the domain I'm going to use is just going to be demo.scherzer.com.au, and you just put in there whatever domain name you want to use for your website. For validation method, we're going to prove to Amazon that this domain is a domain that I own, and the way we're going to do that in my case is DNS validation, but you could also choose email validation, whatever works best for you. I'm just going to choose DNS validation. So if I click here on request, that's going to request my Ssl certificate. You can see it hasn't shown up here, but if I click on View Certificate, it's going to load that certificate up here. What's important is over here, I've got the name and the value of the domain name record I have to put into my DNS provider. If you use Route 53 and the Route 53 is in the same account, then you could also just click here on Create Record in Route 53, and Amazon's going to automatically generate those records for you. However, I'm using Route 53 in a different AWS account. And so what I'll do is I'm going to switch over to that now. Or before I do that, I'm going to copy the CNAME, go over to the Route 53 console. I'm going to paste that in as the record name. And now what we have to be careful is Amazon has already added the scherzer.com.au part of that record. And so I just need to remove that here just to make sure that it's the same. So remove that there. For the value, I'm going to choose the value here, copy that to the clipboard, go back here and paste that in. Now I want to make sure it's not an A record, but in fact a C name. And once I've done that, I can just double check that that full line matches what's shown here. And so it does, and the same with the value. The value should be in here, and then I'm going to create that record. So now that that record's been created, Amazon can approve the validation, and that usually takes a couple of minutes to come through. So while it's doing that, we're going to go over into S3 now, which is the S3 service. And we're going to use S3 as the storage for all the content for our website. And this is essentially going to be the web root of our website. And if you're building a React application, you would upload all the build files into that folder. Same with any other application like Next.js or Docusaurus. You would just upload all the contents, the images, everything would just go straight into this bucket that we're about to generate. So we'll go over here to create bucket. For bucket name, I like to use the same name as I'm going to use for the website. And so I'm just going to call this bucket demo.chatster.com.au. You don't have to do this, but I just like doing it because it just keeps things nice and organized. Region, you can choose whatever region you prefer to have your bucket in, but I'm just going to stick with US East 1, but you're free to choose whatever you want there. As far as public access is concerned, we're going to block all public access just to make sure this S3 bucket stays nice and secure. And versioning, we can leave disabled. You might want to enable encryption if you want to make sure that all your content it stays nice and encrypted. And that's generally good practice if you were doing this in a commercial application. So once you've done that, we're going to create our bucket, and that's been generated now. Seeing that's going to be the root of our website, I'm just going to click in here and I'm going to upload an example file just for testing. Add files, and I've just got a simple index.html file that's just going to say hello world to us. And as I just said before, if you were using this to host a React application or some other modern application, you would just upload all your build assets into this root folder. So click upload here, and that file has now been uploaded. Great, so let's move on now to actually generating our Cloudfront distribution, which is our content delivery network, and that's going to be the main entry point for our application. So we'll head over to the Cloudfront service, and we're going to generate a new Cloudfront distribution. For the origin domain, we can see here, this is the bucket we just generated. So this is the Amazon S3 bucket, and we want to choose demo.chess.com.au. So whatever domain you choose or whatever bucket name you just created, that's what you want to pick here. And that's basically telling Cloudfront, this is where the source files for this Cloudfront distribution are coming from. The name you can leave as the default name if you like, or you can change it to something else. But I'm just going to leave that as a default. As you noticed before, the S3 bucket, we left it as private. And so what we can do is use this thing called Cloudfront Origin Access Identity to access the bucket. So we want to use that, enable that. Now you want to use the one that's been generated. If you don't have one already pre-selected, you can just click on here and create a new one. I was just playing around before, and that's why this is pre-populated. But normally, you would just create a new ORI, stick with the default, and then choose that, and then you're good to go here. You also want to use the wizard to set up the bucket policies for you. That's a nice convenience thing, so choose yes there. The other settings we want to put in, additional settings, you can leave that as is. The patterns we can leave as is. Now at this point here, redirect HTTP to HTTPS, we want to check that on. And what that will mean is if one of our visitors just types in our domain without specifying HTTPS, Cloudfront's got to automatically ensure that they're going to get the site on a secure way, so it's going to redirect into HTTPS. The other settings we can leave as is, we've got this thing here called the caching policy. By default, it's caching optimized, and that's really what you want to use because it's going to use some nice aggressive caching to make sure that the content is going to be delivered to your visitors as fast as possible. However, the caching can cause problems if you're trying to debug Lambda functions, and we might be using a Lambda function later on to manage routing when we get to that section. So for now, I'm going to turn caching off, so disable, just because it makes debugging a little bit easier when you don't have to worry about extra additional caching happening in between the request and what's being served as. So, but definitely keep this, keep caching optimized on when you go to production, and in testing, feel free to turn it to caching disable just to simplify debugging. Under additional settings, we can keep all those at the default levels for now. Later on, we're going to use a viewer request function to manipulate the URL, and that's going to help us in doing our React routing. The other settings we can leave. Then we have here something called alternate domain names. And what we want to do is when Cloudfront generates a distribution, it'll generate a domain name on the AWS side with some random key. But what we want to do is we want to actually use our own domain name. And so in here, we want to put the same domain name as what we used when we generated Ssl Certificate. So we click here on add item, and I'm just going to put here demo.shatzer.com.au. Now, by now, our certificate should have been issued, so we might need to, if it's not showing in here, it already is, but if it wasn't showing in here, you would just click refresh, and then the certificate should be down there if it's been issued and validated correctly. So we'll choose that here. That lights up green, we're all good to go. Security policy and everything else, we can leave at default settings. The default root object we might want to use is index.html, and this is going to make sure if someone doesn't type in index.html, they're going to get served this file. Standard login we can leave off. IPv6, that's the preference, leave as is. And for description, I'm just going to say my demo static web site. Whoops, helps if we can spell site. Now we're going to create that distribution. And for all intents and purposes, that's all we really need to do if you just wanted to host a normal static HTML website. However, as I said before in the introduction, we're talking about a modern application built on a JavaScript framework like React or Next.js, and they've got some little peculiarities, mainly around the way they do routing. And so they kind of expect that the index.html file is mostly called no matter what people put into the URL. And so the way we can deal with that is we can go to error pages, and we can create a custom error response. And typically what Cloudfront will do, if it can't find a URL, it's going to return a 403 error because we've kept that bucket, if you remember, completely private. So it won't actually return 404, it'll return 403. And so what we want to do is every time we get a 403 error, which means that a resource hasn't been found, we want to actually return our index.html page. And so we'll say that we're going to return index.html. And instead of returning status code 403, we're going to make that a successful call. And so once we've done that, we can create this create custom error response. Oops, what have I done wrong? The path, sorry. It needs to be like that. And that's been set up now. If we go back to our distribution, we can see that's currently deploying. As far as a simple React application is concerned, that's pretty much all you'd need to do. However, there's a couple of extra steps. For example, if you have some routing where you don't want to actually see the URL portion, the page portion, like the index.html, then we can do a little bit of extra setup with a Lambda function. And that Lambda function can also do some extra things, such, for example, if you wanted to password protect your website, for example, you could use a Lambda edge function to actually ask for authentication before serving your website content. So what we'll do for that is we're going to jump over to Lambda, and here it's really, really important that you actually make sure that you choose, again, US East. If you're in a Sydney region or any other region for that matter, then when we go to configure our Lambda edge function, you actually won't see that shown in the screen. So just make sure that you're up in North Virginia or the US East 1 region there. Once we've done that, we want to create a function. We're going to author a function from scratch, give it a function name. We might just say demo, oops, I can't spell demo, Lambda edge, and execution role. We want to create a new role. This might be just, let's call that my awesome function role. And policy template, we can use an Amazon provided one. If you type in basic up here, you can see you've got a basic Lambda edge permission function. So we'll just tick that. We don't need to worry about the advanced settings. That's nothing to worry about down there. And once we've filled all that out, we can just create our function down here. So create function. Okay, so now we've seen that function's been generated, and what I'm going to do now is I've got some code ready to go, and I'm going to put that code, I'm going to link to that code, and it's either going to be on Bitbucket or GitHub or on my blog, but the link should be shown on your screen somewhere, otherwise I'll link to it at the end of the video. And so this function we can use to secure the website or do some fancy routing and some other stuff we need to do. Now, something that's important with this interface, you've got this option up here to deploy to Lambda Edge. However, that won't actually work if you haven't first deployed the code that you've pasted down here. So just make sure that you save that and you click this deploy button here. And once this has been deployed down here, you'll get this message up here saying that the successfully updated the function demo Lambda Edge. Once that's been done, then we can go to the actions, click deploy to Lambda Edge, and up here we'll choose our Cloudfront distribution. If that's not the one you expect, you can always close that and then it'll list all the distributions you have. In this case, I want to pick my demo setting website. And I spelled that wrong too, but never mind. Select that here. The Cloudfront event you want to use in this case is viewer request. We can leave all the other things as the defaults. We can confirm that we want to deploy that to Lambda Edge, and then we go and click on deploy. So what's happening right now is Amazon is going to start pushing that Lambda function across to all its edge locations, and so that can take several minutes to do that. And if we go over back to Cloudfront, and apologies if I've been saying CloudFormation, I've been meaning to say Cloudfront. For some reason, I sometimes just say CloudFormation when I mean Cloudfront. So apologies for that. So it's Cloudfront we're talking about. What we can see here now is Cloudfront is deploying, and that might take up to 10 minutes to happen. We'll just wait for that deploy, and then we'll pick up and continue from there. Hello and welcome back. So the distribution has now been deployed, and the last step that's left is to make sure that when someone types in our alternate domain name, demo.ssl.com.au, that they actually see our Cloudfront distribution, which then is going to forward the request to the S3 bucket, and then from there it's going to serve our content. So what we want to do is we want to copy that Cloudfront distribution domain name that's been generated by AWS. Then you want to head back over to your DNS provider. In my case it's Route 53, but I'm in a different account, but that's okay. And in the case of Amazon, what you actually want to do is you do want it to be an A record, and we want to make sure that we put in demo. So again, this has got to be the same domain name as what we used when we issued our Ssl certificate. In this case, we're going to choose an alias. Our endpoint is going to be our Cloudfront distribution. And the trick here is because my Cloudfront distribution is in a different AWS account, it actually won't show up in the search field. But what you can do is you can simply just paste that in and not worry about it not being found. And you just say create, and Amazon's quite happily going to create that for you. So now that we're back, we can double check that our site's been deployed. That's fine. The other thing I want to show you is what the Lambda function did now. If we go back to the distribution and we go to our behaviors and we select the default behavior and click on edit, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see now that every time the viewer request event happens, Amazon's going to call this Lambda function. And we can use that Lambda function, or we can use these methods to do all kinds of cool things for our website. Some examples of things I've done with this is I've password protected a website, so you need to have basic authentication to see any content, but also other more advanced routing things or routing needs you might have. So if there's anything you kind of need that normally you would do with Apache or mod rewrite or Nginx in those web servers, you can pretty much do a lot of that stuff just by using some of these events and then writing some Lambda code. But as I said before, at the end of this video, I'll link to the source code as a baseline for a function you can use. And I might even include the stuff for password protecting a website. Just be aware though, that if you use the password protection functionality that's in that source code, you also need to include this body tag. So you also need to tick that include body to make that Lambda function work. But that's all I wanted to show for now. So that's probably been enough time now for that Lambda function to have been deployed. And so if you open a new browser window up now and we put in HTTP, I'm going to put in HTTP on purpose just to make sure that the website actually reroutes. And I'll put in ssl.com.au and just confirming here it's HTTP. So it's not secured. If I press enter, Cloudfront has now redirected me to the HTTPS. It's serving the site securely, and here's our Hello World application. And that's pretty much all there's to it from that point. The error code behavior I like to demonstrate. So if we go in here and we put in some random URL, as would be the case when you're doing some routing, and you press enter, the Lambda function and that behavior that we implemented is currently always serving that home index.html page. And so that's pretty much exactly what you need if you wanted to host a React application or a Next.js application inside of this system. So that's all I've got for you for now. So I hope that's really useful for you and you get some out of that. And I think it's a good baseline for both a home personal project as well as a commercial application that you might have in any scenario there. I hope that has been useful to you. If you're looking for the source code for the Lambda functions that I showed, I'll probably have them up on my blog, which should be shown down below. And if I have the time, I might even write up a tutorial for those people who prefer following these things along in a written format. If you have any comments or questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them and help. And other than that, the next time I think I've got something useful and interesting, I'll make another video. Until then.